There are nights when the silence of the world brings no peace. It only amplifies the noise within. You lie down, but something in you stays upright, thinking, anticipating, replaying old dialogues, predicting pains that may never come. The tired body tries to sleep, but the mind seems to be at war with time. It's as if carrying too many thoughts is secretly your way of not falling apart, of not feeling, of keeping yourself functioning, even if only on the outside. Overthinking is a sophisticated form of absence. It's the intellectual disguise of a weary soul that traded feeling for reasoning, that gave up the now in exchange for a future that never arrives. Nietzsche knew this. He didn't think to escape. He collapsed, trying to hold the world inside his own mind. The weight of the universe doesn't fit into a single heart, and yet, many of us try. You try to be strong by being lucid. You try to have control through understanding. But perhaps the excess of lucidity is costing you something far more valuable: your presence, your body, your peace. And what if all this thinking is just fear in disguise, dressed up as intelligence? What if you're not actually seeking answers, but avoiding the questions that hurt? Some truths aren't spoken out loud, they're whispered by the soul, and one of them may be this: overthinking is a kind of loneliness we've learned to call clarity. Nietzsche said that when you gaze long into the abyss also gazes into you. But perhaps what he meant was even more intimate, that the abyss isn't out there, it lives inside. And those who think too much know this place well, a dark space without ground where each thought seems to dig a little deeper, where the mind spins in circles trying to resolve wounds that belong to feeling, not to thinking. You believe you're seeking truth, but maybe you're just trying to escape yourself, to flee from the anguish of not being in control, from the fear of accepting that some questions have no answer. In that case, thinking is not a quest, it's a shield. It's as if each thought were a protective layer over what you don't want to touch. The pain of childhood, the guilt you can't name, the emptiness that screams when the world goes silent. The mind creates mazes to avoid descending into the heart, and in these mazes, thought becomes obsession. To ruminate is not to reflect, it's to get lost inside your own head, like someone walking without ever moving. Neuroscience might explain it. The brain registers these cycles as threat. The amygdala activates the same alarm as physical pain, but it's not the body that hurts. It's the soul trying to return to the present, while you cling to the illusion that understanding everything will save you. Perhaps thinking is just the way you've found to keep existing, without having to feel everything that still pulses inside. There is a voice inside you that doesn't scream, but judges. It observes every choice, every silence, every emotion that slips through, and it compares. It compares you to an image you don't even remember creating, but which imprisons you every day. Nietzsche called these idols, not of stone or gold, but invisible ideas you've learned to worship. The idea of being strong, of being always rational, of never failing, of managing it all, of being accepted. You don't live, you try to appear to be living correctly. Every gesture has to make sense. Every emotion has to be justified. And, little by little, you become a performance of yourself, suffocated by a script you didn't even write. When this ideal becomes the ruler, the now becomes a failure, because it's never enough, never calm enough, never fully you. The wound isn't only in what you feel, it's in what you demand from yourself before even allowing yourself to feel, and that makes you sick. The soul cannot bear to be measured. The heart doesn't know how to live inside a logic that only accepts what is useful. Maybe, just for a moment, you can imagine something simple, writing down that ideal on paper and letting it go, tearing it, burying it, letting the earth receive it as something that has fulfilled its role and now needs to rest. Because you weren't born to fulfill an idea. You were born to find yourself, even if that means getting lost from what others expected you to be. There is a tiredness that doesn't come from the body, but from the soul, that tirelessly tries to give meaning to everything. It's the subtle effort of interpreting every pain, decoding every silence, seeking a reason even for what hurts, as if understanding could provide control, as if naming the suffering might prevent it from passing through us. But there comes a moment when this search for meaning becomes a golden prison, because too much meaning also suffocates. It weighs, it demands answers where only presence belongs. And under this weight, you disconnect. From yourself, from the now, from what is simple, from the breeze that touches your face, from affection that doesn't need to be explained. Nietzsche once asked, what if everything you lived had to be repeated for all eternity, not as punishment, but as a mirror? Could you endure the eternal return of your routine? your thoughts, your affections? Or are you merely surviving, pushing the days ahead, hoping that one day meaning will arrive and rescue you? Sometimes what hurts isn't life. It's the exhausting attempt to make it logical, to shape it in a way that fits into your beliefs. But the soul doesn't want to fit. It wants to feel. It wants to breathe. It wants to exist, even if it can't be explained. Because maybe the greatest exhaustion in your life comes from trying to make sense of everything all the time, when in truth, what you most need is simply to be. Imagine if every moment of your life, every gesture, every choice, every word left unspoken, had to be repeated forever, not as a metaphor, but as destiny, eternity spinning around what you live today. Nietzsche called it the eternal return, a quiet but profound test of the authenticity with which you walk. If the life you live now were to repeat infinitely, could you bear it? Or have you been living as someone who is only waiting for something better, fuller, more justifiable? Some people live as though now is just a rehearsal, as though happiness is always postponed, suspended in a future that depends on change, improvement, or merit. But what if nothing changes? What if life doesn't give you the relief you expect, but the invitation you've been avoiding? The invitation to say yes to what is, not what should be. Nietzsche called that amor fati, the love of fate, of imperfection, of one's own story, not as resignation but as lucidity, like someone who looks at life and, even tired, decides to inhabit it completely. You don't have to like everything, but maybe you need to stop fighting everything, because the war you wage against what is drains you more than any pain. Perhaps a small gesture, a minute of presence, a glance without judgment, a silence that asks for no answer, is the beginning of a life you'd be willing to live again, even if it's still not perfect, because maybe it never will be. But even so, it can be true. There is a kind of loneliness that doesn't come from the absence of people. It comes from the excess of thoughts without being heard, from the feeling of being strange in a rushed world, where everything must have logic, function, performance. Many who walk with us live like this, like Nietzsche, thinkers, sensitive, out of place, with a vast inner world, and few spaces where it can breathe. The thinker's solitude isn't empty, it's too full of perceptions that don't fit in ordinary conversations, full of feelings no one ever taught you how to name, full of questions that time doesn't answer. And then inside something begins to go quiet, not from peace, but from exhaustion. But there is something sacred in that silence, something that doesn't destroy, it reveals. Clarissa Pinkola Estes wrote that the soul needs time and solitude to restore itself, like a wounded animal that hides in the forest to heal, like a heart that finally allows itself to listen to its own beating without needing to explain anything. Maybe what this solitude tries to tell you isn't that you're wrong, but that you're straying from yourself to fit into places that have no room. Maybe the pain that pulses in the silence isn't a flaw. Maybe it's a call, a reminder that there are parts of you still waiting to be recognized and not fixed. Because some wounds don't want solutions. They want listening and respect, like an old friend returning, just to remind you who you are. Not every awakening is light. Sometimes seeing too much is tiring, feeling too much drains you, understanding too much confuses. There comes a point where lucidity crosses the boundary of care and turns into punishment. You didn't lose your mind from thinking. You lost it from not being able to stop, from not being able to breathe between one question and the next, from living as if every thought were urgent and every silence a threat. Knowledge without pause becomes a burden. Awareness without rest becomes a knot. Nietzsche walked this edge, between genius and breakdown, between the deep gaze and the abyss that stares back. He knew that thinking can illuminate, but it can also burn, and that without the body as anchor, the mind gets lost from itself. Because there is a wisdom that doesn't come from thinking, it comes from feeling, from inhabiting the now, from the hand on the chest, from the breath that needs no understanding, from the presence that doesn't have to be explained. 3 cycles of air, 3 cycles of return, as if the world paused for 1 second, and you at last remembered you're alive. The line between lucidity and despair is thin, and often, only the body knows where it is. It trembles, hardens, falls ill, pleads, not for you to think more, but for you to finally feel, because the truth that liberates doesn't come from excessive analysis. It comes from the courage to return to what is simple, and to what still pulses, even when everything feels lost. Become who you are. Nietzsche's phrase echoes like an invitation to authenticity, but also like a riddle, because what happens when you no longer know who you are? when the image you built dissolves, when everything that once felt right loses its meaning. Creating your own values sounds like freedom, but it can also be an invisible burden, because for many, it's not the lack of direction that hurts. It's the weight of having to invent a path, and this weight often wears the mask of choice. But inside, it's solitude. It's insecurity. It's the feeling that if everything depends on you, then every mistake is your fault. What if the wound wasn't caused by someone else? What if what hurts the most is how much you tried to fit into ideas that weren't yours? Molding yourself to be accepted, staying silent to avoid disappointing, hiding so you wouldn't be rejected. Pain doesn't just come from the world. It comes from how deeply you abandoned yourself trying to be someone better. There's a seductive belief in the idea of total authenticity, as if it were possible to be whole all the time. But the truth is that being who you are also includes imperfections, the pauses, the parts that still don't know. Creating your own values isn't about creating a new ideal. It's about recognizing that something within you already knows, even when everything outside feels uncertain. And maybe that knowing doesn't come from the mind, but from the soul that silently waits for you to stop molding and just listen to yourself, without goals, without demands, just presence, like someone who, finally, accepts that being imperfect is also a value. There are questions that will never be answered, pains that can't be explained, scars that words cannot translate, and that's okay. Maybe the greatest miracle isn't understanding, but continuing without a map, without certainty, without meaning. Thinking may be a way of trying to escape pain, fear, emptiness, thinking to avoid feeling, thinking to avoid surrender, thinking to avoid breaking. But there comes a moment when that mechanism becomes a prison. The mind locks itself in a cycle, and the body, forgotten, begins to scream. Osho said, "The mind lies, but the body always tells the truth." And sometimes truth doesn't need to be said. It needs to be heard with the chest, felt on the skin, recognized in the silence. Because there are parts of you that are tired of being analyzed. They just want space to exist. Maybe you've been trying to solve an equation that never had an answer, and in doing so, you've forgotten that living is not about solving. It's about experiencing, about allowing yourself to err, to stumble, to start again, about lying down for a moment and asking, with honesty, what am I avoiding feeling today? The answer may not come in words, but it will come as relief, because when you stop seeking meaning and you begin to find yourself again, and in that reunion you may realize, life isn't about understanding everything. It's about allowing something within you to keep pulsing, even without knowing why. Nietzsche wasn't a hero, nor a martyr. He was a mirror, one that doesn't distort, but reveals, that doesn't tell you what to do, only shows you where it hurts. He thought so much that he lost the ground beneath his feet, saw the world with such clarity that he could barely bear to live in it. And perhaps that's why he still touches us, because his pain wasn't exceptional, it was human. There are those who believe that pain is a mistake, a sign that something has gone wrong. But maybe pain is only the confirmation that we are still alive, that we still feel, that we haven't completely given up. Because when everything in you tries to control, and it still hurts, maybe the problem isn't what you're living, but how hard you've tried to carry it all alone. Overthinking may just be the way you try to protect yourself from feeling, from falling, from breaking. But, ironically, it's that very excess of thought that keeps you trapped. Liberation doesn't come through explanation, it comes through acceptance. Maybe what you need most right now isn't another answer, but a pause to breathe, to listen to your body, to come back to yourself, because in the end, you don't have to carry the universe. You just need to remember there is a space inside you that still knows how to rest, and there, in the silence that makes no demands, you might find the truth that truly sets you free, the one that cannot be explained, only felt.